Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello, welcome to Economy Watch with Governor. I'm Fazeel Najib. My guest today is an eminent person in Mauritius, Monsieur Gilbert Gnany. Gilbert holds a master's degree in econometrics from the University of Toulouse and a DESS in management and microeconomics from the University of Paris X. He is currently the Chief Strategy Officer of the MCB Group while acting as advisor to the board. Previously, he was a board official and senior advisor on the World Bank Group's executive board and the group chief economist of the MCB after having been the economic advisor to the Minister of Finance. During his career, he has been involved in various high-profile boards and committees. Amongst others, he chaired the Stock Exchange of Mauritius and the Statistics Advisory Council and has been a member of the Board of Governors of the Mauritius Offshore Business Activities Authority. He is currently the chairperson of the Statistics Board whilst being a director on the Board of Investment and Senate member of the University of Mauritius. He is also a member of the IMF Advisory Group for Sub-Saharan Africa. Gilbert, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Right. To begin with, can you perhaps tell us about the makeup of the Mauritius economy?
In fact, Governor, we got independence, in 1968. Starting in 68, Mauritius was very poor. We had a monocrop economy coming from the colonial days, and the start was quite tough. Even a lot of specialists were thinking that Mauritius had no future, given the size and structure of the economy. Over the first 5-6 years, there was a sugar boom. Government invested a lot in social, housing, health, education. And then we had, unfortunately, a huge crisis end of 17, beginning of 80s. We went on the structural adjustment program of the IMF, and we took some harsh decision to bring back refinances to equilibrium. In the beginning of these 80s, there was really a shift in economic policy. When we started, obviously, there was a lot of focus on inward. We were more inward looking. We were trying to do import substitution, a lot of things that all our other countries were trying to do. But in the beginning of the 80s, there was a major shift. We changed our attitude, tried to attract foreign investors, cut the tax rate after the structural adjustment loans. The corporate rate was as high as 70%. It was cut in one go to 35%. And then we opened the country, trying to attract first investors in the textile sector. Why? Because we had a small manufacturing sector, but given the level of unemployment after the crisis, we needed to find jobs for our young compatriots. So there was a lot of investment from Hong Kong investors, and then Mauritians also invested in the sector, and the textile industry boomed in the early 80s. We were experiencing at that time like 8-9% real growth rate in the sector. The country, at the end of the crisis, our per capita income was approximately $1,000. And with the growth, we started to grow, diversify, and grow in the other sectors. And by the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, the GDP was already close to $3,000. We started the effort for diversification to tourism, which was the logical step given the nature of Mauritius, and then to financial services. It was a specific strategy to broaden the economic base of Mauritius. And in services, we tried to find niches. Obviously, historically, we had banks for a very long time. The first bank was created in 1830s, so it's a long tradition. But trying to find jobs for this new, because our level of education was increasing, we needed to find jobs for professionals. So at that time, government thought about two angles. One on the trade sector, the free port, and then on the financial services side. On the financial services side, we thought about the offshore that we used to call now the global business. So we attracted a number of very large banks like the HSBCs, with Barclays, with Deutsche banks, who were regulated in their own countries, but we attracted to Mauritius to try to set up offshore banking units. The first step was to attract these big names. And then we needed to create the volume besides the banking. So we developed the offshore sector per se, not the purely banking sector. We benefited from a very favorable treaty that we did have with India at that time. And so a number of companies wanted to invest in India, very often use the Mauritian channel. Because we had the treaty, but also the environment. The Companies Act is a very liberal and of British tradition, so the investors are very at ease with this sort of environment. And so that was the fourth pillar. We continued to develop, and then the later stage was ICT. There again, we benefited from a strategic alliance with India, and then we targeted some specific markets. As you are aware, Mauritius is bilingual, so because we were both a French colony and a British colony, so we tried to target at first stage some specific francophone countries using this expertise. And then the next following step, given that we have restructured our tax system, Mauritius has a single corporate tax of 15%, corporate tax, single personal tax of 15%. We don't have capital gain tax, we don't have tax on dividends. So it's a very favorable, very liberal approach, but at the same time, we have a very strong social program. We have free health, free education from pre-primary to tertiary education. So, and we have a small deficit even if we have free education and free health, even free transport for the kids to go to the schools. So we do have a very attractive tax regime. It's a low tax, very efficient, very transparent, very rules-based. So the following step was to try to attract talent. So what we did, if you invested above a specific threshold, you could benefit from a permanent resident scheme. These had a positive impact also on the construction sector, because when you attract talent, people which are obviously more richer than the average Mauritian, they do buy houses in some specific areas. Because of the size of Mauritius, we can't let foreigners buy everywhere. So we have some specific areas designated that we call the IRS, Integrated Resort Scheme, close to the sea, but specific for foreigners, so that don't to disrupt the local housing market, because people need to have access to affordable housing. So this real estate has been booming in around 2006, 2007, but unfortunately, because of the crisis, this has lost a bit momentum. But still, it had positive impact on both on the balance of payment through the FDI, and also in terms of bringing some additional talent that we don't have in the local context to be able to deliver in our strategy. And the last sector that we are focusing on is the ocean industry. We do have a seafood, what we call the seafood hub, exporting mainly fish, tuna, to the European market and to some other specific market, which is also doing quite well. As you can see, we move from a monocrop economy, one single sector. Sugar, we used to call it king sugar. It contributed more than 25% of GDP. 98% of the earnings came from sugar in the old days. Today, sugar accounts for 3% of GDP. It is not simply because the sugar didn't grow, because we diversified the base. And nowadays, well, I just told you before the crisis in 79, 82, our per capita income was 1,000 USD. Now it's nearly 10,000.
Good. I can see that Mauritius has done very well in terms of diversifying the economy instead of relying on a single industry at the time, sugar. But I'd like to know more about your financial services industry and how you went about in establishing the industry, the sort of things that you first did, and in terms of bringing in new legislation, the level of commitment by the government and the parliament, and also promotion.
Yeah. Yes, financial services sector is a very large sector in Mauritius. Fortunately, we had, even before we diversified, we had a very strong domestic banking sector. We had two domestic banks, the MCB and the State Bank of Mauritius, and also a lot of large foreign banks. So the banking sector was relatively strong. But obviously, in the diversification effort, we needed to bring other players. When I just said earlier, in the beginning of the 90s, when we decided to go on the offshore route, there were a lot of skeptics, obviously, from the international community. So what we did, we learned. We didn't reinvent the wheel. What we wanted to do, we attracted a number of people who had developed offshore management, offshore financial sectors, from Guernsey, from Caymans, and whatnot. So we had a big conference early '92 with full participation from government and the private sector. So we had a sort of brainstorm. We thought that it was strategically important for us to attract these guys. Obviously, when you start, you have to give some incentives. So the first step was, because the tax rate in the domestic economy was still relatively high at that time, and we could not apply the same rate to the offshore sector. Basically, we would not have come. So we started with a zero tax on that, but with the idea of bringing it at a later stage to integrate the economy. And so when we attracted, say, these banks, the idea from the Ministry of Finance perspective was to grant a very low tax at the beginning. At a point in time, at least move it from zero to low tax, say 3%, and that at a later stage to integrate the domestic banking sector with the offshore sector. In fact, we started in the early 90s, as I just said, and in 2004 there was a legislation. The Banking Act was amended to give one single license for both domestic banks and offshore banks. It was integrated. But to be able to integrate, we had to integrate also the tax rate, because the tax regime had to be the same. What we did on the domestic side, everybody was paying 15%, and you have a tax credit that was equivalent to the difference between 15 and 3, that is 80% tax credit. So all the banks are regulated by the central bank, and you've got, if a former offshore bank do business in the domestic side, you will pay 15% like any other domestic bank, and it's completely open.
Sorry, yeah? All the banks regulated, is this both offshore as well as onshore are regulated by?
Of course, for historical reason, a bank that was established to do only offshore still do a lot of offshore, but they are totally allowed to do domestic banking. But the domestic banks also used to have foreign investment or lending outside Mauritius. So when we integrated, in fact, we changed this notion of offshore to foreign source, to be able to integrate. So today, the foreign source income is taxed as the former offshore. In fact, the offshore has been integrated in the foreign source. At the same time, the government passed a series of legislation to try to upgrade the sector. We had a very liberal Companies Act, I just said, and a number of different laws that are conducive to offshore, like the foundation, the limited partnership. There are a number of things that have been done to cater for the needs of the industry. Today, the financial services sector accounts for nearly 15% of GDP. Of course, it's still dominated by banks. You've got insurance, the other financial intermediation, but specifically the former offshore, that we call now the global business, accounts for nearly 5% of GDP. If we take into account all the services around the financial services, the OMCs, obviously, the offshore management companies, and they account for nearly 2% of GDP. And it's an economy of 10 billion. So you can see it has been quite successful. And obviously there are a number of lawyers, accountants, economists who work specifically for the global business. And obviously these jobs are higher value-added jobs. But of course we have still room for improvement. We have to continue to bring more substance and broaden the area of product and services that the center has to offer. But for a country with a per capita income of say 9,500, 9,000 to 10,000 USD, contributing to nearly 14-15% is quite an achievement, I have to say.
I agree. Yeah. What sort of challenges did you face at the beginning when you started venturing into the global business?
First, we needed to understand the industry itself. You know, we had been doing sugar, and then textile, the third step tourism. It's a completely different industry. Even we needed to understand. That's why we needed to attract talent also to be able to deliver. Of course, when we started, you had to start to open the door. At the beginning, when we gave the zero tax, some people said, why do you give zero tax? So even the OECD was looking at, the IMF was looking at and said, what is the strategy? But we had a clear strategy on that. Even if we were granting a zero tax at the beginning, it was well regulated. In fact, the banks, I just said, we granted the licenses only to the big names, which had another regulator in their own country. So we could rely on this dual regulation. On the purely non-bank activities, obviously when you started, we had two types of licenses, like in any offshore, which is the GBL1, which is more substance, and then the GBL2. At the beginning, we had a series of companies in the GBL2s, but more and more the focus was on GBL1, the one with real substance. And it makes sense both for us and for the countries that were recipient countries that were using Mauritius as a jurisdiction.
GBL being Global Business License.
Yeah.
Right.
So showing substance is obviously very important. We are in a world where, you know, we need to have exchange of information. There are much more pressures today. So we had to show that we were serious in regulating. We had given that it was very new, even to market it was difficult. We created two institutions that was relevant in our context. First, the regulator itself. So we created a MOBA, the Mauritius Offshore Business Activities Authority, which had specific responsibilities to kick off the sector. And at a point in time, we set up one specific marketing agency for financial services, because marketing financial services is very different from marketing in tourism that we used to do. So it was called the Financial Services Promotion Agency, and it had specific responsibilities. And when the sector grown and matured, we integrated it in our investment arm. Today, the Board of Investment, which is the government arm for marketing Mauritius, do both finance and other sectors. But at the very beginning, we needed people that knew specifically how to market the financial services.
Right. So to begin with, you had a well-established domestic banking industry where you had some of the well-known players like the Barclays and HSBC already. So when you ventured into the global business area, offshore area, you still needed some more to come in. And what was the basis for them to come in, apart from the financial advantages that they were getting?
In fact, probably we were a bit lucky that we had this agreement with India. Obviously, the big banks wanted to use Mauritius because we had a very favorable treaty. So these banks were doing business anyway in India, and some of them, for them, it makes economic sense to be present in Mauritius, to establish physical presence in Mauritius, to be able to. The first step was clearly India, and then even the sector diversified. But the first step, the kickoff was really India. And so all these big names that were doing business in India came to Mauritius. When we say all, we are talking about 10 banks. We are not talking of 100 banks. Now, Mauritius, we have 21 banks, and let's say about 10 of them were former offshore banks. But government was very careful to grant licenses only to very big players because we wanted really proper regulation, and we didn't want to have reputational issues also because it was a new sector. We needed to learn how to even to regulate it properly. So we counted on the offshore banks that to have this dual regulation.
Right. Obviously, this is an area where the services such as accountancy and lawyers and would be needed. Did you seek any support at the beginning from anybody else outside in terms of setting up the whole infrastructure for the financial services, global financial services?
Fortunately, we had at that time a relatively big pool. Obviously, we didn't necessarily were experts in offshore. We attracted a few really talents outside, mainly from UK at the beginning, because we understood our law. Our companies have the same, very similar law, and very often deals were structured from UK or US to India, and because of the treaty, we set up, we domiciled the company and then structured the deals. But fortunately, especially that we had free education and free health, we still generated a lot of lawyers and accountants and economists, and that was an ideal route for them to go. And because they were employing obviously a lot of professionals. But at the beginning, and if you need expertise, I think today when you look at Singapore opening the country to attracting talent is very important, and then you can shorten the learning curve and then go at least at the first, second level, so that you can develop it more domestically with your own people. That we did, that worked for us.
Right. I presume that there will also be concerns, or rather that your government would have been aware of the international sensitivities about establishing such an industry. And what sort of measures did the government take to dispel such fears?
First of all, we gave the licenses for the banks, at least to the big names. That was the first step. When we developed the industry itself, obviously there were concerns, but we were very careful because Mauritius had historically exported to the European Union. So we took their comments very seriously. Obviously, we are a sovereign state. We wanted to develop a new sector, but we were very careful and very cooperative, both in terms of exchange of information, and when there was issues, Mauritius tackled them up front. In fact, nowadays, Mauritius is in the whitelist. We are not at all under pressure from the OECD directly. But still, in this difficult world, you have to be mindful that some countries are very concerned about offshore management centers. But today, this sector is totally integrated to the domestic sector. In fact, we say we are no more an offshore center. We are a center, a financial services sector with a low tax that applies to any company, be it for the domestic sector or to cater for foreign investment. I just told you we've got one corporate tax of 15%, and for the corporate tax, with a particular tax credit will apply to all foreign source income. So I have a company, be it in the banking sector or in other sectors, have the same tax treatment.
Okay. The sensitivities of the international community in different countries are handled differently, but I also presume you would also have come up with strong anti-money laundering legislation.
Sure. When I was talking of exchange of information, in fact, we have very, very strict anti-money laundering, very strict KYCs. I think any country that wants to have a serious financial services sector has to take this sort of decision up front, because otherwise you can have problems, and then you have reputational issues, and then it's so difficult to develop the sector. Definitely, we are a member of all these organizations and take the When there are guidelines, we do apply, be it at the central bank or the regulator of the non-bank financial services activities, which is the Financial Services Commission. And the two institutions that regulate finance in Mauritius, so the central bank and the Financial Services Commission, do have a memorandum of understanding, very strict memorandum of understanding, where they collaborate a lot, and it's a very clean jurisdiction.
Good.
Yeah.
So, we were talking about the challenges at the beginning. The government would have had a very resolute commitment in terms of venturing into global business area. What sort of challenges did you, if any, have from the legislative side?
In fact, obviously, we had to start somewhere. So when you created the MOBA, the Mauritius Offshore Business Activities, there was a series of legislation that came to support the industry, be it the foundation, the limit partnership, and a series of activities. But obviously, you have to be mindful of what the other centers do and strike the right balance. But certainly, you will, if you are setting up a center, you will have to bring a series of legislation, because the activities is completely different from the activities you cater for purely domestic side.
Right. And at the same time, these legislations and the regulatory framework was set up. Did you also have some amount of awareness creation in the judiciary area? Was there anything done in the judiciary area?
Yeah, surely. For example, even the state law office that prepares the legislation, we need to have people that will be able to cater for financial services legislation. We did, fortunately, we had some very good talent over there that has been involved in the sector for the last 20 years with a lot of expertise in finance, and fortunately we were lucky probably on that front.
Right. And now, 2 decades on, now do you feel that the global business industry is now owned by the local population?
I would say yes. Obviously we still have room for improvement. We need to bring more substance, more wealth management, fund management at the level of Mauritius. We still have to do a long way to compare with Singapore, obviously. But locally, people, I think, have accepted the sector. You have obviously jobs that are relatively well paid, because these are international rates. So it has given our young population, which is obviously a lot of people coming from university, you need to find jobs. And for us, given the size of our country and the size of our economy, developing this particular sector in the services sector made sense. It was a necessity to create jobs for our young graduates, and offshore has been, the global business have definitely delivered on that front.
I think Mauritius and Maldives, we have quite similar economies, and you were also, and you are also dependent on tourism. We are very heavily dependent on tourism, to the extent you were back then dependent on the sugar industry. Given the similarities of our 2 countries, do you think there are any inspirations that we can draw from the Mauritian experience and in terms of diversifying our economy?
Yes. I just told you that probably Maldives, a few things could be relevant from to the Maldives, coming from our diversification effort. So since the creation of the global business, specifically structured back in early 90s, so we have progressed to become we can say internationally recognized center now, with more and more substance and trusted structured jurisdictions. So given the size of your economy and the size of the population, it makes sense to try to diversify in the services sector. And I think that financial services sector is a natural choice for you. What we have capitalized on, and some of them are very relevant for the Maldives. And first, we need international openness. Maldives has a long tradition of openness. When you look at tourism, it's clear that you will fit on that particular angle. Second one, we benefited from close ties and preferential access to some specific markets. Some Europe, Asia, you are very close to a number of Asian countries. I think it will also apply. It has to be obviously investment friendly, and probably there is some scope for improvement when you look at the index, at the Doing Business Index that was recently published, where Maldives is now ranked 95. Surely you can very easily go up the ladder on that. We had a dynamic and bilingual workforce because obviously we were a French colony and a British colony, so we could cater for this particular segment. We had a vibrant private sector. Clearly, the Maldivians have a very vibrant private yes. sector, both in tourism and in trade. And obviously, the government has to act as facilitator. And I see no reason, given your current setup, why we couldn't move in that particular direction. But one condition that is essential, that probably Maldives lacks today, is the network of double taxation treaties. You need to have these treaties to be able to develop a global business activity. In Mauritius, we do have 37 DTAs. So just to give you the number of treaties that we do have with regional players, be it in Asia or in Africa.
These 37 would have been concluded within a time frame of what?
Oh, most of them has been in the last 10 years. Most of them. We had the treaties with Europe before, and then in the Indian treaty dated back to 1883. But most of today, Mauritius is trying to be like a bridge between the Asian investment towards Africa. So we are putting a lot of emphasis on having double taxation treaties and also IPPAs, the protection with African counterparts. So the other issue that you have to be careful, we touched upon that a bit earlier, is this issue of reputation. So you have to be very careful. We have to comply with international standards, and we need, obviously, this has to be complemented. Have strong willingness to encourage substance. Substance and reputation, I think, both are very important to set up a global business activity. So we are obviously we have recognition from international standard bodies, being IOSCO, IAS, OECD, the ETF, and the IFSB. So that's how we did it. Today, if you are starting anew, this is an example that may be relevant in your particular context. So there are a number of enablers to kick off the sector. So the first is the introduction of adequate and conducive legal, regulatory, and fiscal framework. It is a priority matter that the regulatory infrastructure be established from the outset in alignment with international regulations and best practices. I think and no regulatory obstacles be erected against the further diversification and financial products. So on one side you have a reputation side, and then you have to, even when you set up a sector, that it should encourage substance and diversification within the financial services sector. Second, laying the foundation for this financial center is building this network of treaties. I think these two are critical. Right. What is the current status? As of date, you have one DTA, I understand, signed on 2005. This is limited to a multilateral agreement between members of South Asian Association. But you need formal bilateral DTAs to be able to kick off. That will be my humble suggestion. You need these treaties to be able to develop the sector. Mauritius started 20 years ago, and today offshore contribute for 5% of GDP. 5% of GDP may not look like very large, but it's a very diversified economy. Yes. It's a $10 billion economy, and today offshore contributes more than sugar. Sugar used to be king sugar. So it just, because we have a multiple pillar pillars of growth. So in terms of also, even in product, probably you will have to identify some niche, be it wealth management, be it investment holding, be it protector cell companies, be it fund structuring, administration, management, advisory, back office outsourcing in accounting, financial administration, payroll, financial and tax planning consultancy. But obviously you have a potential competitive advantage is Islamic finance product. There is already high demand for Islamic banking in the region, and so I think you may have a niche on that particular angle. And then you talked about promotion. This also, I think you will have to set up a dedicated unit, and we had this financial services a promotion agency, but because from its inception, the strategy should be focused on substance. And to establish reputation. So you need really a specific unit to deliver on that angle. Another critical element is adherence to international norms. I think we already discussed that. This is very important at the beginning. Obviously, when you will start if you are starting a similar center, you will have septics like in Mauritius. You are ideally placed in a very dynamic region, so I don't see why it won't be a success if you start the financial services sector here.
Yeah. Thank you, Gilbert, for being on the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The story of the successful diversification of Mauritius economy is one that Maldives can learn from. From an economy then dependent on the sugar industry to the extent that now Maldives is dependent on tourism, Mauritius has successfully reduced its heavy reliance on sugar exports by establishing new industries, among them offshore financial business and services, a reliable source of foreign exchange in addition to tourism industry. Today, the country's offshore financial services account for 5% of the GDP. In a $10 billion economy, it is hugely significant. While Mauritius strives to emulate the success of the Maldivian tourism industry, Mauritius continues to build on its successful international financial and business services. Any such structural changes needs resolute commitment from the government. Given the state of affairs in our economy here in Maldives, such diversification is no longer an option. It has become necessary. If the government were to decide on such a course of action, Maldives has good prospects. In addition to conventional international banking services, Maldives has the potential to also venture into international Islamic financial services. In Labuan, Malaysia, for example, offshore Islamic insurance industry holds a substantial share of the country's offshore financial services. Countries comparable to Maldives have successfully diversified their economies into international financial and business services. These include Barbados, a country quite similar to the Maldives in terms of population per capita and makeup of the economy, and then Seychelles, with a much smaller population and economy, also diversified successfully into international financial services. In Maldives, it's been at least 2 decades since discussions on the need to diversify the economy was started. Given the limited natural resources and the unfavorable cost of production, the potential to diversify into manufacturing is somewhat limited. Services, therefore, is the natural area to diversify into. To diversify into international financial services is already very late, but it is always better late than never. Thank you for watching today's show. We will see you again in the next show of Economy Watch with Governor. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.